Hello, and welcome to the Better Hiker podcast, where we seek to better ourselves and the trails we walk. If you're an urban hiker, weekend warrior, or long-distance backpacker, this is the podcast for you. In each episode, we'll be exploring adventurous tales, both new and old, learning how to be more mindful of the natural world, and motivating ourselves to be better hikers. Lace up your shoes and start walking. Here's your host, Arthur McMahon.
Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to take a look into the transcendentalist mind of Henry David Thoreau. Author, essayist, abolitionist, he was a man who believed in the inherent goodness of people and nature, though I would argue that he leaned more on the natural side of things. Many of the people he encountered had the tendency to ruffle his feathers a bit, and vice versa. Transcendentalists, like Thoreau, are strong believers in the power of the individual, and Thoreau was an outspoken advocate of this, with many of his published works relaying his beliefs that societal institutions like organized religion and political parties sully the individual, that they strip away a person's freedom. He's best known for Walden, a book he authored detailing his time living in a cabin he built near Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts. In this American classic, Thoreau emphasizes the importance of self-reliance and criticizes contemporary culture. He submersed himself in nature for a couple of years, looking to live a simple, self-sufficient life free from the hustle and bustle of society. Today, we'd say he went off the grid. As a result, he was left with a lot of time to ponder. That's a common theme with many of history's great thinkers. The majority of them at some point sought solitude and spent an inordinate amount of time in their own heads, something so few of us today would even consider as a good use of our time. One of the primary outlets for deep thinkers over the past several centuries has been the journal. Not a simple diary outlining the meals one ate during the day and the documentation of emotional misfirings. That can be useful as well. But what I'm referring to is something more. An introspective journal, a keepsake of a person's philosophies, their ideas, their creative solutions to life's problems. An enigmatic record of events and interpretations that somewhat, somehow, in some small sense, define a person, at least for the period in which they update their entries. Walden was, in a way, a summarization of Henry David Thoreau's personal journal, the place where he wrote down his ideas before they flittered away into the ether of time and space. In his journals, he documented the observations of nature, his political opinions, his love of writing, and in these texts you get to witness his evolution of thought, how his childlike wonder and playfulness with nature are complemented by his scientific understanding of the migration of birds and the seasonal changes of plant life and water sources and the weather. And though Henry was an intelligent and poetic man, he was also a goofball. More often than not, once that childlike wonder slipped its way into his thoughts, it soon took total control, coercing Thoreau to chase after skunks and catch flying squirrels and cause all sorts of woodland mischief. For a lover of nature, Thoreau sure liked to meddle with it, for scientific purposes, of course. Much like how Thoreau used the passage of the four seasons in Walden to symbolize human development, so too are we going to look at Thoreau himself through the seasons. In this episode, we'll be listening to Thoreau's springtime journal entries, peering into how he manifested his transcendental philosophies into his daily routine. Spring is a time of new life, as it springs out of the ground. This is how we're going to take our first glimpse into Thoreau's existence, his curiosity, as something new and fresh and full of life. And in future episodes, we'll cover Thoreau's summer, autumn, and winter entries to see how his external observations and internal philosophies shifted with the seasons. For now, let's jump right into early spring in Massachusetts, where winter's ice is just beginning to thaw. February 2nd, 1852. I am reminded of spring by the quality of the air. It is a natural resurrection, an experience of immortality. February 27th, 1852. The main river is not yet open, except in very few places, but the North Branch, which is so much more rapid, is open where I walk today, and flowing with full tide. Bordered with ice on either side, sparkles in the clear, cool air, a silvery sparkle, as from a stream that would not soil the sky. We have almost completely forgotten the summer. This restless and now swollen stream has burst its icy fetters, and I stand looking upon it westward for half a mile, where it winds slightly under a high bank. Its surface is lit up here and there with a fine-grained silvery sparkle which makes the river appear something celestial, more than a terrestrial river, which might have suggested that once surrounding the shield of Homer. If rivers come out of their prison thus bright and mortal, shall not I too resume my life spring with joy and hope? Have I no hopes to sparkle on the surface of life's current? Is it worthwhile to have our faith revived by seeing where a river swells and eddies about a half-buried rock? February 27th, 1853. A week or two ago I brought home a handsome pitch pine cone which had freshly fallen, and was closed perfectly tight. It was put into a table drawer. Today, I am agreeably surprised that it has there dried and opened with perfect regularity, filling the drawer, and from a solid, narrow, and sharp cone, has become a broad, rounded, open one, has, in fact, expanded into a conical flower with rigid scales, and has shed a remarkable quantity of delicate winged seeds. Each scale, which is very elaborately and perfectly constructed, is armed with a short spine pointing downward, as if to protect its seeds from squirrels and birds. That hard, closed cone, which defied all violent attempts to open it, and could only be cut open, has thus yielded to the gentle persuasion of warmth and dryness, the expanding of pine cones. That, too, is a season. February 28th, 1852. Today it snows again, covering the ground. To get the value of a storm, we must be out a long time and travel far in it, so that it may fairly penetrate our skin, and we be, as it were, turned inside out to it, and there be no part in us but is wet or weather-beaten, so that we become storm men, instead of fair weather men. Some men speak of having been wet to the skin once as a memorable event in their lives, which, notwithstanding the croakers, they survived. March 4th, 1859. What a perfectly New England sound is the voice of the crow. If you stand perfectly still anywhere in the outskirts of the town and listen, stilling the almost incessant hum of your personal factory, this is perhaps the sound which you will be most sure to hear, rising above all sounds of human industry, and leading your thoughts to some far bay in the woods, where the crow is venting his disgust. This bird sees the white man come and the Indian withdraw, but it withdraws not. Its untamed voice is still heard above the tinkling of the forge. It sees a race pass away, but it passes not away. It remains to remind us of aboriginal nature. March 10th, 1853. This is the first really spring day. The sun is brightly reflected from all surfaces, and the north side of the street begins to be a little more passable to foot travelers. You do not think it necessary to button up your coat. March 10th, 1854. Misty rain, the third day of more or less rain. Saw a skunk in the corner road, which I followed 60 rods or more. Out now about 4 p.m., partly because it is a dark, foul day. It is a slender black and white animal, with its back remarkably arched, standing high behind and carrying its head low. It runs, even when undisturbed, with a singular teeter or undulation, like the walking of a Chinese lady, very slow. I hardly have to run to keep up with it. It has a long tail which it regularly erects when I come too near, and prepares to discharge its liquid. It is white at the end of the tail, and on the hind head, and in a line on the front of the face. The rest black, except for the flesh-colored nose and, I think, feet. It tried repeatedly to get into the wall, and did not show much cunning. Finally, it steered for an old skunk or woodchuck hole under a wall 4 rods off, and got into it, or under the wall, at least, for the hole was stopped up. There I could view it closely and at leisure. It has a remarkably long, narrow, pointed head and snout, which enable it to make those deep narrow holes in the earth by which it probes for insects. Its eyes are bluish-black, and have an innocent, childlike expression. It made a singular loud padding sound repeatedly on the frozen ground under the wall, undoubtedly with its 4 feet. I only saw the upper part of the animal. Probably it has to do with getting its food, padding the earth to get the insects or worms, though why it did so then, I know not. Its track was small and round, showing the nails, a little less than an inch in diameter. Its steps alternate, 5 or 6 inches by 2 or 2.5, sometimes 2 feet together. There is something pathetic in such a sight, next to seeing one of the human aborigines of the country. I respect the skunk as a human being, in a very humble sphere. The weather is almost April-like. We have much of this rainy, drizzling weather in early spring, after which we expect to hear geese. March 13th, 1859. If men were to be destroyed, and the books they have written be transmitted to a new race of creatures, a new world, what kind of record would be found in them of so remarkable a phenomenon as the rainbow? It is remarkable that the spots where I find the most arrowheads, etc., being light, dry soil, are among the first to be bare of snow and free from frost. It is very curiously and particularly true, for the only parts of the northeast section of the great fields which are so dry that I do not slump there are those, small in area, which perfectly bare patches of sand occur, and there, singularly enough, the arrowheads are particularly common. Indeed, in some cases, I find them only on such bare spots, a rod or two in extent, where a single wigwam might have stood, and not half a dozen rods off in any direction. Yet the difference of level may not be more than a foot, if there is any. It is as if the Indians had selected precisely the driest spots on the whole plain with a view to their advantage at the season. If you are going to pitch a tent tonight on the great fields, you would inevitably pitch on one of those spots, or else lie down in water or mud or on ice. It is as if they had chosen the site for their wigwams at this very season of the year. March 15th, 1852. This afternoon I throw off my outside coat. A mild spring day. I must hie to the great meadows. The air is full of bluebirds, the ground almost entirely bare. The villagers are out in the sun, and every man is happy whose work takes him outdoors. I lean over a rail to hear what is the air liquid with the bluebirds warble. My life partakes of infinity. The air is as deep as our nature. Is the drawing in of this vital air attended with no more glorious results than I witness? The air is a velvet cushion against which I press my ear. I go forth to make new demands on life. I wish to begin this summer well, to do something in it worthy of it and of me, to transcend my daily routine and that of my townsmen, to have my immortality now, in the quality of my daily life, to pay the greatest price, the greatest tax, of any man in Concord, and enjoy the most. I will give all I am for my nobility. I will pay all my days for my success. I pray that the life of this spring and summer may ever lie fair in my memory. May I dare as I have never done. May I persevere as I have never done. May I purify myself anew as with fire and water, soul and body. May my melody not be wanting to the season. May I gird myself to be a hunter of the beautiful, that naught escape me. May I attain to a youth never attained. I am eager to report the glory of the universe. May I be worthy to do it, to have got through with regarding human values so as to not be distracted from regarding divine values. It is reasonable that a man should be something worthier at the end of the year than he was at the beginning. March 16th, 1858. A still, foggy, and rather warm day. I heard this morning that peculiar, drawling note of a hen who has this hennish way of expressing her content at the sight of bare ground and mild weather. The crowing of cocks and cawing of crows tells the same story. How conversant the Indian, who lived out of doors, must have been with the mousier leaves, pine needles, mosses, and lichens which form the crust of the earth. No doubt he had names accordingly for many of the things for which we have no popular names. I walk in muddy fields, hearing the tinkle of the newborn rills, where the melted snow has made a swift rill in the rut of a cart path, flowing over an icy bottom, and between icy banks. I see, just below a little fall an inch high, a circular mass of foam or white bubbles, nearly 2 inches in diameter, slowly revolving, but never moving off. The swift stream at the fall appears to strike one side, as it might the side of a water wheel, and so cause it to revolve. But in the angle between this and the fall, half an inch distant, another circle of bubbles, revolving very rapidly in the opposite direction. The laws, perchance, by which the world was made, and according to which the systems revolve, are seen in full operation in the rill of melted snow. March 18th, 1858. Almost every bush has its song sparrow this morning, and their tinkling strains are heard on all sides. You see them just hopping under a bush or into some other covert as you go by, turning with a jerk this way and that, or they flit away just above the ground, which they resemble. Theirs is the prettiest strain I've heard yet. How much more habitable a few birds make the fields! At the end of the winter, when the fields are bare, and there is nothing to relieve the monotony of withered vegetation, our life seems reduced to its lowest terms. But let a bluebird come and warble over them, and what a change! The note of the first bluebird in the air answers to the pulling rill of melted snow beneath. It is evidently soft and soothing, and, as surely as the thermometer, indicates a higher temperature. It is the accent of the south wind, its vernacular. It is modulated by the south wind. The song sparrow is more sprightly, mingling its notes with the rustling of the brush along the watersides, but it is at the same time more terrene than the bluebird. The first woodpecker comes screaming into the empty house, and throws open doors and windows wide, calling out of each of them to let the neighbors know of its return. But heard farther off, it is very suggestive of ineffable associations, which cannot be distinctly recalled, of long-drawn summer hours, and thus it is also an effect of music. I was not aware that the capacity to hear the woodpecker had slumbered within me so long. The robin does not come singing, but utters a somewhat anxious or inquisitive peep at first. The song sparrow is immediately most at home of those that I have named. Each new year is a surprise to us. We find that we had virtually forgotten the note of each bird, and when we hear it again, it is remembered like a dream, reminding us of a previous state of existence. How happens it that the associations it awakens are always pleasing, never saddening, reminiscences of our sanest hours? The voice of nature is always encouraging. March 20th, 1855. It is remarkable by what a gradation of days which we call pleasant and warm. Beginning in the last of February, we come at last to real summer warmth. At first a sunny, calm, serene winter day is pronounced spring, or reminds us of it. And even the first pleasant spring day, perhaps, we walk with our greatcoat buttoned up, and our gloves on. Trying the other day to imitate the honking of geese, I found myself flapping my sides with my elbows, and uttering something like "snowwack," with a nasal twang and twist of my head, and I produced the note so perfectly in the opinion of the hearers that I thought I might possibly draw a flock down. March 22nd, 1855. On the steep hillside south of the pond, I observed a rotten and hollow hemlock stump about 2 feet high and 6 inches in diameter, and instinctively approached it with my right hand ready to cover it. I found a flying squirrel in it, which, as my left hand covered a small hole at the bottom, ran directly into my right hand. It struggled and bit not a little, but my cotton gloves protected me, and I felt its teeth only once or twice. It also uttered 3 or 4 dry shrieks at first, something like cricket, cricket, crick, 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 crick. I rolled it up in my handkerchief, and holding the ends tight, carried it home in my hand, some 3 miles. It struggled more or less all the way, especially when my feet made any unusual or louder noise going through the leaves, etc. I could count its claws as they appeared through the handkerchief, and once it put its head through a hole. It even bit through the handkerchief. Color, as I remember, a chestnut ash inclining to fawn or cream color, slightly browned. Beneath, white. The underedge of its wings tinged yellow, the upper dark, perhaps black, making a dark stripe. It was a very cunning little animal, reminded me of a mouse in the room. Its very large and prominent black eyes gave it an interesting, innocent look. Its very neat, flat, fawn-colored, deciduous tail was a great ornament. Its sails were not very obvious when it was at rest, merely giving it a flat appearance beneath. It would leap off and upward into the air 2 or 3 feet from a table, spreading its sails, and fall to the floor in vain, perhaps strike the side of the room in its upward spring, and endeavor to cling to it. It would run up the window by the sash, but evidently found the furniture and walls and floor too hard and smooth for it, and after some falls became quiet. In a few moments it allowed me to stroke it, though far from confident. I put it in a barrel and covered it up for the night. It was quite busy all the evening gnawing out, clinging for this purpose, and gnawing at the upper edge of a sound oak barrel, and then dropping to rest from time to time. It had defaced the barrel considerably by morning, and would probably have escaped if I had not placed a piece of iron against the gnawed part. I had left in the barrel some bread, apple, shagbarks, and cheese. It ate some of the apple in one shagbark, cutting it quite in 2 transversely. In the morning it was quiet, and squatted, somewhat curled up amid the straw, with its tail passing under it, and the end curved over its head, very prettily, as if to shield it from the light and keep it warm. I always found it in this position by day when I raised the lid. March 23rd, 1855. Carried my flying squirrel back to the woods in my handkerchief. I placed it on the very stump I had taken it from. It immediately ran about a rod over the leaves and up a slender maple sapling about 10 feet. Then, after a moment's pause, sprang off and skimmed downward toward a large maple 9 feet distant, whose trunk it struck 3 or 4 feet from the ground. This it rapidly ascended on the opposite side from me, nearly 30 feet, and then clung to the main stem with its head downward, eyeing me. After 2 or 3 minutes' pause, I saw that it was preparing for another spring by raising its head and looking off, and away it went in admirable style, more like a bird than any quadruped I had dreamed of, and far surpassing the impression I had received from naturalists' accounts. I marked the spot it started from and the place where it struck, and measured the height and distance carefully. It sprang off from the maple at a height of 28 feet and a half, and struck the ground at the foot of a tree 50 1/2 feet distant measured horizontally. Its flight was not a regular descent. It varied from a direct line both horizontally and vertically. Indeed, it skimmed much like a hawk, and part of its flight was nearly horizontal. It diverged from a right line 8 or 10 feet to the right, making a curve in that direction. There were 6 trees from 6 inches to a foot in diameter, and 1 a hemlock. After the various attempts in the house, I was not prepared for this exhibition. It did not fall heavily as in the house, but struck the ground quietly enough, and I cannot believe that the mere extension of the skin enabled it to skim so far. It must be still further aided by its organization. Perhaps it fills itself with air first. Kicking over the hemlock stump, which was a mere shell with holes below and a poor refuge, I was surprised to find a little nest at the bottom, open above just like a bird's nest, a mere bed. It was composed of leaves, shreds of bark, and dead pine needles. March 23rd, 1856. I spent a considerable portion of my time observing the habits of wild animals, my brute neighbors. By their various movements and migrations, they fetched the ear about to me. Very significant are the flight of geese and the migration of suckers, etc. But when I consider that the nobler animals have been exterminated here, the cougar, panther, lynx, wolverine, wolf, bear, moose, deer, beaver, turkey, etc., I cannot but feel as if I have lived in a tamed and, as if it were, emasculated country. Would not the motions of those larger and wild animals have been more significant still? Is it not a maimed and imperfect nature that I am conversant with, as if I were to study a tribe of Indians that had lost all its warriors? Do not the forest and the meadow now lack expression? Now that I never see nor think of the moose with a lesser forest on his head in the one, nor of the beaver in the other? When I think what were the very sounds and notes, the migrations and works, and changes of fur and plumage which ushered in the spring, and marked the other seasons of the year, I am reminded that this is my life in nature. This particular round of natural phenomena which I call a year is lamentably incomplete. I listen to a concert in which so many parts are wanting. The whole civilized country is, to some extent, turned into a city, and I am that citizen whom I pity. Many of those animal migrations and other phenomena by which the Indians mark the season are no longer to be observed. I seek acquaintance with nature, to know her moods and manners. Primitive nature is most interesting to me. I take infinite pains to know all the phenomena of spring, for instance, thinking that I have here the entire poem, and then, to my chagrin, I learn that it is but an imperfect copy that I possess and have read, that my ancestors have torn out many of the first leaves of the grandest passages, and mutilated it in many places. I should not like to think that some demigod had come before me and picked out some of the best stars. I wish to know an entire heaven and an entire earth. All the great trees and beasts, fishes and fowl, are gone. The streams, perchance, are somewhat shrunk. Break, 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 break. That's my chicken impersonation. Good, huh? Maybe not as good as Thoreau's bird calls. Thoreau, what are you doing? I told you this guy was a goofball. Those poor New England rodents never saw him coming. I hope you all appreciated those animal impersonations he made me do, by the way. I was struggling not to crack up. My neighbors must think I'm nuts. Oh well, whatever. Every time Henry Thoreau went on a walk around Walden Pond, he was like a kid in a candy store, eyes gleaming with wonder and excitement. He literally ran around from creature to creature, examining them like they were buckets of gummy bears and lollipops. His enthusiasm was enriched by his scientific knowledge and his unquenchable thirst for understanding. We're beginning to see where his philosophies stem from, what he thinks is most important in life. He appreciates the details of his surroundings, everything from the little plants and bugs to the passing of the seasons. This is where he finds his joy, where whimsy and curiosity comfort his soul. As soon as he broadens his focus to something like the rest of the civilized world, his thoughts sour, they turn rotten, forming into negative feelings like pity and spite. Is that true of all of us? Can we make ourselves happier by turning our thoughts away from the world at large, and instead focusing on the details of nature, the little earthly things which surround us? Change your thoughts and you'll change the world, said Marcus Aurelius, a stoic-minded man who was considered to be the last great emperor of Rome. He also said, confine yourself to the present. Alright, enjoy some music. When we get back, we'll dig deeper into Thoreau's philosophies.
To find out what you want, you didn't know. Everything you do, it's always new. Waiting wonder why. Stupid animal who doesn't know what was any passing.
February 25th, 1859. Measure your health by your sympathy with morning and spring. If there is no response in you to the awakening of nature, if the prospect of an early morning walk does not banish sleep, if the warble of the first bluebird does not thrill you, know that morning and spring of your life are past. Thus may you feel your pulse. February 28th, 1860. Passed a very little boy on the street today who had on a homemade cap of a woodchuck skin, which his father or older brother had killed and cured, and his mother or older sister had fashioned into a nice warm cap. I was interested by the sight of it. It suggested so much of family history, adventure with the animals, story told about it. Johnny had been promised a cap many times, and now the work was completed. A perfect little idol, as they say. The cap was large and round, big enough, you would say, for the boy's father, and had some kind of cloth visor stitched to it. The top of the cap was evidently the back of the woodchuck, and it was as fresh and handsome as if the woodchuck wore it himself. The great gray-tipped hairs were all preserved and stood out above the brown ones, only a little more loosely than in life, as if he had put his head into the belly of a woodchuck, having cut off its tail and legs, and substituted a visor for the head. The little fellow wore it innocently enough, not knowing what he had on forsooth, going about his small business pit-a-pat, and his black eyes sparkled beneath it when I remarked on its warmth, even as the woodchuck's might have done. Such should be the history of every piece of clothing that we wear. As I go down the Boston road, I see an Irishman wheeling home from far a large, damp, and rotten pine log for fuel. He evidently sweats at it and pauses to rest many times. He found, perhaps, that his woodpile was gone before the winter was, and he thrusts thus to contend with the remaining cold. I see him unload it in his yard before me, and then rest himself. The piles of solid oak wood which I see in other yards do not interest me at all, but this looked like fuel. It warmed me to think of it. He will now proceed to split it finely, and then I fear it will require about as much heat to dry it as it will give out at last. How rarely we are encouraged by the sight of simple actions in the street. We deal with banks and other institutions where the life and humanity are concealed, what there is of it. I like at least to see the great beams half exposed in the ceiling or the corner. March 4th, 1852. It is discouraging to talk with men who will recognize no principles. How little use is made of reason in this world. You argue with a man for an hour, he agrees with you step by step, and you are approaching a triumphant conclusion. You think you have converted him, but no, he has a habit. He takes a pinch of snuff. He remembers that he entertained a different opinion at the commencement of the controversy, and his reverence for the past compels him to reiterate it now. You began at the butt of the pole to curve it. You gradually bend it round according to rule, and planted the other end in the ground, and already in imagination saw the vine curling round this segment of an arbor, under which a new generation was to recreate itself. But when you had done, it sprang back to its former stubborn and unhandsome position like a bit of whalebone. March 5th, 1841. How can our love increase unless our loveliness increases also? We must securely love each other as we love God, with no more danger than our love be unrequited or ill bestowed. There is that in my friend before which I must first decay and prove untrue. Love is the least moral and the most. Are the best good in their love, or the worst bad? March 5th, 1853. The Secretary of the Association for the Advancement of Science requested me, as he probably has thousands of others, by a printed circular letter from Washington the other day, to fill the blanks against certain questions, among which the most important one was what branch of science I was specially interested in, using the term science in the most comprehensive sense possible. Now, though I could state to select a few that Department of Human Inquiry which engages Roe, and should rejoice at an opportunity to do so, I felt that it would be to make myself the laughingstock of the scientific community to describe to them the branch of science which specially interests me, inasmuch as they do not believe in a science which deals with the higher law. So I was obliged to speak to their condition and describe to them that poor part of me which alone they can understand, the fact that I am a mystic, a transcendentalist, and a natural philosopher to boot. Now I think of it, I should have told them at once that I was a transcendentalist. That would have been the shortest way of telling them that they would not understand my explanations. How absurd that, though I probably stand near to nature as any of them, and by constitution as good an observer as most, yet a true account of my relation to nature should excite their ridicule only. If it had been the secretary of an association of which Plato or Aristotle was the president, I should not have hesitated to describe my studies at once and particularly. March 5th, 1858. We read the English poets, we study botany and zoology and geology, lean and dry as they are, and it is rare that we get a new suggestion. We would fain know something more about these animals and stones and trees around us. We are ready to skin the animals alive to come at them. Our scientific names convey a very partial information. They suggest certain thoughts only. It does not occur to me that there are other names for most of these objects, given by a people who stood between me and them, who had better senses than our race. How little I know of that arbor vitae when I have only heard what science can tell me. It is but a word, it is not a tree of life. But there are 20 words for the tree and its different parts, which the Indian gave, which are not in our botanies, which imply a more practical and vital science. He used it every day. He was well acquainted with its wood, its bark, and its leaves. No science does more than arrange what knowledge we have of any class of objects, but, generally speaking, how much more conversant the Indian with any wild animal or plant than we, and in his language is implied all that intimacy, as much as ours is expressed in our language. How many words in his language about a moose or a birch bark and the like? The Indian stood nearer to the wild nature than we. The wildest and noblest quadrupeds, even the largest freshwater fish, some of the wildest and noblest birds, and the fairest flowers have actually receded as we advanced, and we have but the most distant knowledge of them. A rumor has come down to us that the skin of a lion was seen, and his roar heard by an early settler. But there was a race here that slept on his skin. It was a new light when my guide gave me Indian names for things for which I only had scientific ones before. In proportion as I understood the language, I saw them from a new point of view. A dictionary of the Indian language reveals another and wholly new life to us. Look at the wood canoe, and see what a story it tells of outdoor life, with the names of all of its parts and of the modes of driving it, as our words describe the different parts of a coach, or at the word wigwam, and we see how close it brings you to the ground, or at Indian corn, and see which race has been most familiar with it. It reveals to me a life within a life, or rather, a life without a life, as it was the threading of the woods between our towns, and yet we can never tread on its trail. The Indian's earthly life was as far from us as heaven is. March 11th, 1842. We can only live healthily the life the gods assign us. I must receive my life as passively as the willow leaf that flutters over the brook. I must not be for myself, but God's work, and that is always good. I will wait the breezes patiently, and grow as they shall determine. My fate cannot but be grand so. We may live the life of a plant or an animal without living an animal life. This constant and universal content of an animal comes of resting quietly in God's palm. I feel as if I could at any time resign my life and the responsibility into God's hands, and become as innocent and free from care as a plant or stone. My life, why will you linger? Are the years short and the months of no account? Can God afford that I should forget him? Is he so indifferent to my career? Can heaven be postponed with no more ado? Why were my ears given to hear those everlasting strains which haunt my life, and yet to be profaned by these perpetual dull sounds? Why, God, did you include me in your great scheme? Will you not make me a partner at last? March 11th, 1856. When it is proposed to me to go abroad, rub off some rust, and better condition myself in a worldly sense, I fear lest my life would lose some of its homeliness. In these fields and streams and woods, the phenomena of nature here, and the simple occupations of the inhabitants should cease to interest and inspire me. No culture or wealth would atone for the loss. I fear the dissipation that traveling, going into society, even the best, the enjoyment of intellectual luxuries, imply. If Paris is much in your mind, if it is more and more to you, Concord is less and less, and yet it would be a wretched bargain to accept the proudest Paris in exchange for my native village. At best, Paris could only be a school in which to learn to live here, a stepping stone to Concord, a school in which to fit for this university. I wish so to live ever as to derive my satisfactions and inspirations from the commonest events, everyday phenomena, so that when my senses hourly perceive in my daily walk, the conversations of my neighbors may inspire me, and I may dream of no heaven that which lies about me. A man may acquire a taste for wine or brandy, and so lose his love for water, but should we not pity him? The sight of a marsh hawk in Concord meadows is worth more to me than the entry of the Allies into Paris. In this sense I am not ambitious. I do not wish my native soil to become exhausted and run out through neglect. Only that traveling is good which reveals to me the value of home, and enables me to enjoy it better. That man is the richest whose pleasures are the cheapest. It is strange that men are in such haste to get famous teachers, rather than knowledge, as learners. March 12th, 1842. Consider what a difference there is between living and dying. To die is not to begin to die and continue. It is not a state of continuance, but of transientness, whereas to live is a condition of continuance, and does not mean to be born merely. There is no continuance of death. It is a transient phenomenon. Nature presents nothing in a state of death. March 12, 1853. It is essential that a man confine himself to pursuits, a scholar, for instance, to studies which lie next to and conduce to his life, which do not go against the grain either of his will or his imagination. The scholar finds in his experience some studies to be most fertile and radiant with light, others dry, barren, and dark. If he is wise, he will not persevere in the last, as a plant in a cellar will strive towards the light. He will confine the observations of his mind as closely as possible to the experience or life of his senses. His thought must live with and be inspired with the life of the body. Some men endeavor to live a constrained life, to subject their whole lives to their will, as he who said he would give a sign, if he were conscious, after his head was cut off, but he gave no sign. Dwell as near as possible to the channel in which your life flows. A man may associate with such companions, he may pursue such employments, as will darken the day for him. Men choose darkness rather than light. March 14th, 1842. It is not easy to find one brave enough to play the game of love quite alone with you, but they must get some third person or world to countenance them. They thrust others between. Love is so delicate and fastidious that I see not how it can ever begin. Do you expect me to love you unless you make love secondary to nothing else? Your words come tainted if the thought of the world darts between thee and the thought of me. You are not venturous enough for love. It goes alone unscared through the wildernesses. As soon as I see people loving what they see merely, and not their own high hopes that they form of others, I pity them, and do not want their love. Did I ask thee to love me who hate myself? No! Love that which I love, and I will love thee that loves it. If I know what I love, is it because I remember it? Life is grand, and so are its environments of past and future. Would the face of nature be so serene and beautiful if man's destiny were not equally so? March 15th, 1841. The clergy are as diseased and as much possessed with the devil as the reformers. They make their topic as offensive as the politician, for our religion is as unpublic and incommunicable as our poetical vein, and to be approached with as much love and tenderness. March 19th, 1842. Everywhere in the fields, in the corn and grain land, the earth is strewn with the relics of a race which has vanished as completely as if trodden in with the earth. Is it not good to remember the eternity behind me as well as the eternity before? Wherever I go, I tread in the tracks of the Indian. I pick up the bolt which he has just but dropped at my feet, and if I consider destiny, I am on his trail. I scatter his hearthstones with my feet, and pick out of the embers of his fire the simple but enduring implements of the wigwam and the chase. In planting my corn in the same furrow which yielded its increase to his support so long, I displace some memorial of him. I have been walking this afternoon over a pleasant field planted with winter rye, in a region where this strange people once held their dwelling place. Another species of mortal men, but little less wild to me than the musquash they hunted. Strange spirits, demons, whose eyes could never meet mine, with another nature and another fate than mine. The crows flew over the edge of the woods, and wheeling over my head, seemed to rebuke, as dark-winged spirits more akin to the Indian than I. Perhaps only the present disguise of the Indian. If the new has a meaning, so has the old. A blithe west wind is blowing all over. In the fine flowing haze, men at a distance seem shadowy and gigantic, as ill-defined and great as men should always be. I do not know if yonder be a man or a ghost. What a consolation are the stars to man, so high and out of his reach, as is his own destiny. My fate is in some sense linked with theirs, and if they are to persevere to a great end, shall I die who conjecture it. It surely is some encouragement to know that the stars are my fellow creatures, for I do not suspect but they are reserved for a high destiny. Man's moral nature is a riddle which only eternity can solve. I see laws which never fail, of whose failure I never conceived. Indeed, I cannot detect failure anywhere but in my fear. I do not fear that right is not right, that good is not good, but only the annihilation of the present existence. But only that can make me incapable of fear. My fears are as good as prophets as my hopes. March 28th, 1856. I think to say to my friend, there is but one interval between us. You are on one side of it, I on the other. You know about it as much as I, how wide, how impassable it is. I will endeavor not to blame you. Do not blame me. There is nothing to be said about it. Recognize the truth, and pass over the intervals that are bridged. Farewell, my friends. My path inclines to this side of the mountains, yours to that. For a long time you have appeared further and further off to me. I see that you will at length disappear altogether. For a season my path seems lonely without you. The meadows are like barren ground. The memory of me is steadily passing away from you. My path grows narrower and steeper, and the night is approaching. Yet I have faith in that the infinite future new suns will rise, and new plains expand before me, and I trust I shall therein encounter pilgrims who bear the same virtue that I recognized in you, who will be that very virtue that was you. I accept the everlasting and salutary law which has promulgated as much that spring when I first knew you, as this when I seem to leave you. My former friends, I visit you as one walks amid the columns of a ruined temple. You belong to an era, a civilization, and a glory long past. I recognize still your fair proportions, notwithstanding the convulsions we have felt, and the weeds and jackals that have sprung up around. I come here to be reminded of the past, to read your inscriptions, their hieroglyphs, the sacred writings. We are no longer the representatives of our former selves. Love is a thirst that is never slaked. Under the coarsest rind is the sweetest meat. If you would read a friend aright, you must be able to read through something thicker and opaquer than horn. If you can read a friend, all languages will be easy to you. Enemies publish themselves, they declare war. The friend never declares his love. April 5th, 1841. This long series of desultory mornings does not tarnish the brightness of the prospective days. Surely faith is not dead. Wood, water, earth, air are essentially what they are. Only society has degenerated. This lament for a golden age is only a lament for golden men. April 11th, 1852. If I am too cold for human friendship, I trust I shall not soon be too cold for natural influences. It appears to be a law that you cannot have a deep sympathy with both man and nature. Those qualities which bring you near to one estranged, you from the other. Every man will be a poet if he can, otherwise a philosopher or man of science. This proves the superiority of the poet. At what an expense any valuable work is performed! At the expense of a life. If you do one thing well, what else are you good for meanwhile?
And break! What an insightful and eloquent man Henry Thoreau was. His philosophies need no summary, as his own words were so precisely chosen and clearly displayed. The transcendental mindset flows like a river from his mind, through his hand, to the written page, and now, to our ears. According to Thoreau, internal happiness is where it's at. It's what life's all about. External influences have no real power over the individual. Societal institutions lead to impossible expectations of progress, which lead to the corruption of the individual. Our culture should take a step back, away from the chaos of our man-made cities, away from materialism and capitalism. We should learn again to respect nature. We should respect the natives who were murdered, displaced, and forgotten. We should respect each other and all things of nature. Wait. I just tried to summarize his philosophies, didn't I? Oops, I'll stop there. In the spirit of Thoreau, let's take a moment to step back. Put your life on hold just for a minute and look at your surroundings. What's there that you've never noticed before? Maybe look a little closer. Your world becomes so much more grand when you take the time to notice the little things. When we come back, we'll take a look at Thoreau's thoughts on writing.
Now I see all of what I was can only be what I become. If you can't sleep, I could leave you wondering. Everything you do has always been waiting under why. Stupid animal that doesn't know what was only passing me by.
February 20th, 1859. Though it was a dry, powdery snowstorm yesterday, the sun is now so high that the snow is soft and sticky this p.m. The sky, too, is soft to look at, and the air to feel on my cheek. Health makes the poet, or sympathy with nature, a good appetite for his food, which is constantly renewing him, whetting his senses. Pay for your victuals then with poetry, give back life for life. March 3rd, 1839. The poet must be something more than natural, even supernatural. Nature will not speak through him, but along with him. His voice will not proceed from her midst, but, breathing on her, will make her the expression of his thought. He then poetizes when he takes a fact out of nature into spirit. He speaks without reference to time or place. His thought is one world, hers, another. He is another nature, nature's brother. March 15th, 1842. The poor have come out to employ themselves in the sunshine, the old and feeble to scent the air once more. I hear the bluebird, the song sparrow, and the robin, and the note of the lark leaps up through the meadows, as if its bill has been thawed by the warm sun. As I am going to the woods, I think to take a small book in my pocket, whose author has been there already, whose pages will be as good as my thoughts, and will eke out or show me human life still gleaming in the horizon when the woods have shut out the town. But I can find none. None will sail as far forward into the bay of nature as my thought. They stay at home. I would go home. When I get to the wood, their thin leaves rustle in my fingers. They are bare and obvious, and there is no halo or haze about them. Nature lies fair and far behind them all. The great and solitary heart will love alone, without the knowledge of its object. It cannot have society in its love. It will expend its love as the cloud drops rain upon the fields over which it floats. How trivial the best actions are! I am led about from sunrise to sunset by an ignoble routine, and yet can find no better road. I must make a part of the planet. I must obey the law of nature. March 17th, 1852. I catch myself philosophizing most abstractly when first returning to consciousness in the night or morning. I make the truest observations and distinctions then, when the will is yet wholly asleep, and the mind works like a machine without friction. I am conscious of having in my sleep transcended the limits of the individual, and made observations and carried on conversations which in my waking hours I can neither recall nor appreciate. As if in sleep our individual fell into the infinite mind, and at the moment of awakening we found ourselves on the confines of the latter. On awakening we resume our enterprises, take up our bodies, and become limited mind again. We meet and converse with these bodies which have previously animated. There is a moment in the dawn when the darkness of the night is dissipated, and before the exaltations of the day begin to rise, when we see things more truly than at any other time. The light is more trustworthy, since our senses are purer and the atmosphere is less gross. By afternoon all objects are seen in mirage. March 18th, 1842. Whatever book or sentence will bear to be read twice, we may be sure was thought twice. I say this thinking of who writes pictures or first impressions merely, which consequently will only bear a first reading, as if any transient, any new mood of the best man deserved to detain the world long. I should call his writing essentially dramatic, excellent acting, entertaining especially to those who see rather than those who hear, not to be repeated, more than a joke. If he did not think who made the joke, how shall he think who hears it? He never consults the oracle, but thinks to utter oracles himself. There is nothing in his book for which he is not and does not feel responsible. He does not retire behind the truth he utters, but stands in the foreground. I wish he would just think, and tell me what he thinks, appear to me in the attitude of a man with his ear inclined, who comes as silently and meekly as the morning star, which is unconscious of the dawn it heralds, leading the way up the steep as though alone and unobserved in its observing, without looking behind. March 20th, 1841. Even the wisest and best are apt to use their lives as the occasion to do something else and then to live greatly. But we should hang as fondly over this work as the finishing and embellishment of a poem. It is a great relief when for a few moments in the day we can retire to our chamber and be completely true to ourselves. It leavens the rest of our hours. In that moment I will be nakedly as vicious as I am. This false life of mine shall have a being at length. March 24th, 1842. Those authors are successful who do not write down to others, but make their own taste and judgment their audience. By some strange infatuation, we forget that we do not approve what we yet recommend to others. It is enough if I please myself with writing. I am there sure of all audience. It is always singular to meet common sense in the very old books, as in the Vishnu Sarma, as if they could have dispensed with the experience of later times. We had not given space enough to their antiquity for the accumulation of wisdom. We meet even a trivial wisdom in them, as if truth were already hackneyed. The present is always younger than antiquity, a playful wisdom, which has eyes behind as well as before, and oversees itself. The wise can afford to doubt in his wisest moment. The easiness of doubt is the ground of his assurance. Faith keeps many doubts in her prey. If I could not doubt, I should not believe. It is seen in the old scripture how wisdom is older than the talent of composition. The story is as slender as the thread on which pearls are strung. It is the spiral line growing more and more perplexed till it winds itself up and dies like the silkworm in its cocoon. It seems as if the old philosopher could not talk without moving, and each motion were made the apology or occasion for a sentence. But this being found inconvenient, the fictitious progress of the tale was invented. The great thoughts of a wise man seem to the vulgar who do not generalize to stand far apart like isolated mounts, but science knows that the mountains which rise so solitary in our midst are part of a great mountain chain, dividing the earth, and the eye that looks into the horizon toward the blue Sierra melting away in the distance may detect their flow of thought. These sentences which take up your common life so easily are not seen to run into ridges because they are all the table land on which the spectator stands. That they stand frowning upon one another or mutually reflecting the sun's rays is proof enough of their common basis. The book should be found where the sentence is, and its connection be as inartificial. It is the inspiration of a day and not of a moment. The link should be gold also. Better that the good be not united than that a bad man be admitted into their society. When men can select, they will. If there be any stone in the quarry better than the rest, they will forsake the rest because of it. Only the good will be quarried. March 25th, 1842. Great persons are not soon learned, not even their outlines, but they change like the mountains in the horizon as we ride along. Comparatively speaking, I care not for the man or his designs who would make the highest use of me, short of an all-adventuring friendship. I wish, by the behavior of my friend toward me, to be led to have such regard for myself as for a box of precious ointment. I shall not be as cheap to myself if I see that another values me. We talk much about education, and yet none will assume the office of an educator. I never gave anyone the whole advantage of myself. I never afforded him the culture of my love. How can I talk of charity who at last withhold the kindness which also makes charity desirable? The poor want nothing less than me myself, and I shirk charity by giving rags and meat. What can I give or what deny to another but myself? That person who alone can understand you, you cannot get out of your mind. The artist must work with indifferency. Too great interest vitiates his work. March 27th, 1857. I would fain to make 2 reports in my journal. First, the incidents and observations of today, and by tomorrow I review the same and record what was omitted before, which will often be the most significant and poetic part. I do not know at first what it is that charms me. The men and things of today are wont to be fairer and truer in tomorrow's memory. Men talk to me about society, as if I had none, and they had some, as if it were only to be got by going to the sociable or to Boston. Compliments and flattery often excite my contempt by the pretension they imply, for who is he that assumes to flatter me? To compliment often implies an assumption of superiority in the complimenter. It is in fact a subtle detraction. March 28th, 1842. How often must one feel, as he looks back on his past life, that he has gained a talent, but lost a character? My life has got down into my fingers. My inspiration at length is only so much breath as I can breathe. Society affects to estimate men by their talents, but really feels and knows them by their character. What a man does, compared with what he is but a small part. To require that our friend possess a certain skill is not to be satisfied till he is something less than our friend. Friendship should be a great promise, a perennial springtime. One may well feel chagrined when he finds he can do nearly all that he can conceive. How poor is the life of the best and the wisest! The petty side will appear at last. Understand once how the best in society live, with what routine, with what tedium and insipidity, with what grimness and defiance, with what chuckling over an exaggeration of the sunshine. I am astonished, I must confess, that man looks so respectable in nature that, considering the littleness Socrates must descend to in the 24 hours, he yet wears a serene countenance and even adorns nature. March 31st, 1842. I cannot forget the majesty of that bird at the cliff. It was no sloop or smaller craft hove in sight, but a ship of the line, worthy to struggle with the elements. It was a great presence, as if the master of river and forest. His eye would not have quailed before the owner of the soil. None could challenge his rights. And then, his retreat, sailing so steadily away, was a kind of advance. How is it that man always feels like an interloper in nature, as if he had intruded on the domains of bird and beast? The really efficient laborer will not be found to crowd his day with work, but will saunter to his task, surrounded by a wide halo of ease and leisure. There will be a wide margin for relaxation to his day. He is only earnest to secure the kernels of time, and does not exaggerate the value of the husk. Why should the hen sit all day? She can lay but 1 egg, and besides, she will not have picked up materials for a new one. Those who work much do not work hard. Nothing is so sure as sense. Very uncommon sense is poetry, and has a heroic or sweet music. But in verse, for the most part, the music now runs before and now behind the sense. It is not coincident with it. Given the meter, and one will make music while another makes sense. But good verse, like a soldier, will make its own music, and it will march to the same with one consent. In most verse there is no inherent music. The man should not march, but walk like a citizen. Lydgate's story of Thebes, intended for a Canterbury tale, is a specimen of most unprogressive, unmusical verse. Each line rings the knell of its brother, as if it were introduced but to dispose of him. No mortal man could have breathed to that cadence without long intervals of relaxation. The repetition would have been fatal to the lungs. No doubt there was much healthy exercise taken in the meanwhile. He should forget his rhyme and tell his story, or forget his story and breathe himself. In Shakespeare and elsewhere, the climax may be somewhere along the line which runs as varied and meandering as a country road, but in Ludgate it is nowhere but in the rhyme. The couplets slope headlong to their confluence.
What I find most interesting about reading journals is the commentary given on the events of a person's life.
Large or small, each event gives insight into the person's interests, and the commentary reflects their character. It's easy to understand who a person was, especially notable historic figures like Thoreau. Wikipedia can only tell you so much, and their published works have been edited and peer-reviewed to perfection, molded into a mere representation of the original ideas and character of the author. Aside from reading journals, I believe many people would find great benefit in writing their own. Journaling has been a joy for me. It's saved me from some dark internal spirals. I tried it when I was a kid, but it never stuck back then. In recent years, I renewed the journaling spirit, and I was bad at it at first, so bad. I didn't know what to write, or who I was writing to, or what my voice was. But each day it got better, and I learned how to translate the thoughts in my head to the written page. I can't make the words flow as eloquently as Thoreau, not just yet, but each day I get a little better at it. The act of journaling trains your mind to focus, to make decisions, to remind yourself of your core values. There are plenty of studies out there that show that writing about your stresses and emotions is good for your mental and physical health. It helped break me out of a depressive funk I was having a while back, and although I don't write in my journal every single day, I know it's there as an outlet when I need it. If you're feeling down or simply want to strengthen your mind, I suggest you start a journal. Write down whatever you want, long or short, good grammar or bad, it doesn't matter. Keep a small notebook in a pocket to jot down your observations of the world, or schedule 10 minutes before you go to bed to reflect on your day. And keep at it for a couple of weeks, give it a good shot. Make it about you. Even if you're the type who cares for everyone else, keep this one for yourself. You're an individual, you're a part of nature, you matter. Dedicate at least a small part of the day to focus on yourself. You don't only deserve it, you need it. Thanks everybody. Better yourself in the trails you walk. Be a better hiker. Maybe start a journal. See you next time.
That's it for this episode of the Better Hiker podcast. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to Better Hiker on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. For more info and content, check out our website at betterhiker.com. To contribute to the show and receive some extra goodies, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/betterhiker. Thanks for listening.